You've been to a lot of board meetings. If you could wave a magic wand and change something about most board meetings that you've been into to make them more effective, what would it be?
I would say just let's kill the death by PowerPoint, right? This idea of, I mean, some board meetings that I've been in, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and you go, and then they read them to you. So I think the concept of QBR Lite is what I like to think about, right? Because I mean, every management team has a different version of their, quarterly business review, but like the idea that each of the key areas, has done a deeper dive, but then you're up leveling it, kind of like the financial dashboard, right? You're probably on a day-to-day basis, and month to month as a management team looking at, a much bigger universe of sort of metrics than what, really, the board needs to see. And it's the same true with the call it the CRO, the CEO presentation, the CFO presentation, right? When I think about what makes for effective materials and discussion in the boardroom, it's the discussion, right? The materials are there to provide, construct for sort of what are the key things that are going well, what are the biggest challenges that the companies or that, particular business leader is facing. And frankly, like how can we be helpful, right? I mean, ultimately, we're there to be able to, be sounding boards and be constructive and of service. So I find like the most useful meetings that I go to are the ones where there's a lot of dialogue and not a lot of, looking up at the screen. So the presumption is that we've read all the materials, the leader kind of gives you an executive summary of here's, what's going well, here's not what's, what I'm really struggling with, and here's what I'd love for us to discuss and get your, input or have a dialogue on. And those are really effective meetings, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat, which is, what is a QBR Lite? And I think you touched right on it, which is you take each of the functional areas and exactly that, what's going well, what's not going well, and can we have a discussion around, those items that are going well and not going well. I think, even talking about what's going well is important to discuss because of the why. If things are going well, why are they going well? And is that something that is worthy of more investment or doubling down on? And so, sometimes boards just talk about what's not going well. And that's understandable. But in startups, you actually want to figure out what's going well and why is it going well, so you can see if that's a thread to just pull on some more.
No, that's right. It's the lather, rinse, repeat, right? I mean, like the key to scale is just sort of figuring out, what are those areas where you can double down on to really get the most leverage, and especially, in a capital efficient way. So when I think about like, back to like QBR Lite, this concept of having, a general board meeting where you're having, the CEO give that version of sort of, the high level and what we just discussed. And then the go-to-market leader, potentially the HR leader, certainly periodically, right? I think as a board, we're really sensitive to what's going on with the ability to hire and, recruit, retain, top talent, how are we positioned to be able to do that? What are the key openings, sort of how do we think about the team around the table for the next level of growth, getting input on that and understanding, what the CEO is thinking as it relates to that. And of course, finance, like we already discussed, is sort of the table stakes item. So I think kind of going through, typical board meeting, hitting on some of the highlights, and then, always coming back to like, what's the product roadmap? What are the key milestones, and any against the context of like M&A, like how to think about that. We haven't touched on that yet, but this concept of, I don't know how many meetings I've been to where all of a sudden, you show up and there's a deal that they want you to approve and you go, how does this even fit into the, the strategy? Like to be able to go, okay, like holistically, how are we thinking about the market that we're going after? What do we do particularly well? What are the adjacencies we might want to expand into? And, this build versus buy, right? Like what do we get if we buy something? There's the financial, arguments for whether or not to do something, but, at the highest level, the strategy, right? Does it make strategic sense to acquire, this technology, this team, this, whatever it is, and to be able to have that, framework when you go into those conversations. So I see that introduced at the boardroom and sometimes in the wrong way.
and it's such an interesting point because in the old environment, for smaller companies, acquisitions were just not practical. Everybody with a PowerPoint was expecting 100 million, a triple digit valuation, triple digit million valuation. One of the benefits of this environment is for strong startups, even during the early growth stages, you could identify, tuck-in teams that will really accelerate your strategy, your product roadmap. And those acquisitions could be reasonable because funding has dried up for companies that aren't the best companies. And so I think it's a really interesting point that this is no longer the domain of the biggest companies, but savvy founders will think about how to use M&A even at the early growth stages as well.
I think that's right. I mean, for years, like we sit there and you go, oh, there's plenty of companies you would like to acquire, but they're just not financially, doable transactions, right? And now, the world has changed, and there's a lot of really interesting companies. And so when, as a board member, like being able to kind of, I always say there's one of these frameworks that's kind of, I call it upstream, downstream, right? So as a company, I kind of like to look at, and again, not that every company is going to be acquired, but if there was, a potential interest in having, a sale to, say, a strategic down the line, understanding who that universe of potential buyers could be for your company and how you fit within that, like, sort of what are the key, gaps, or which ones are and then, at least to be mindful of cultivating relationships, or, thinking about that. And then conversely, as you think about the strategy for the company and how, technology tuck-ins or teams, or however you might think about M&A, being able to identify what are those sort of categories that there's adjacencies, what are the names of some of the companies, so we can not be sort of starting from ground zero again. Like a lot of times people are bringing to the board a request for an approval of something, and it's super helpful to be able to all be aligned and advanced on sort of what are the types of things we'd be willing to engage on M&A on, where are the areas where we think we're really have no interest in going in terms of so it just frames the discussion a lot better and makes for a good dialogue.